Hello and welcome to Community Case Studies, a look at how belonging is really built. I'm Seth Resler, I'm your host. I'm also the founder of Community Marketing Revolution. And today we're going to look at an example of a community from the world of public broadcasting. This actually comes from WYSO, which is better known as WYSO in Southwest Ohio. And they built a community of local producers. They actually trained them to create content for their airwaves so that the content that they are putting out on their airwaves better reflects the larger audience. And my guest today is a storyteller and an educator with extensive experience in radio and podcasting. He is the director of the Eichelberger Center for Community Voices at WYSO. He is dedicated to amplifying diverse voices through community-driven storytelling. The center offers a platform for marginalized groups to share their stories and spark meaningful conversations about critical issues. I'm very excited to have him on. Please welcome Will Davis. Hi, Will. How are you?
Hi, Seth. How are you? Good to see you.
Good. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited. So tell me a little bit about the program. Tell me about the Center for Community Voices.
Well, the Center for Community Voices started about 15 years ago, and I've been involved for about 13 years. It was started by Nina Ellis, who was a recent recipient of the Leo C. Lee Award in Public Radio. So, but she started this program called Community Voices, and it turned into a center. But the reason it began was to give people in the community, and our community is 14 counties in Southwest Ohio, people in the community the tools to tell their own stories in their own voices and to democratize storytelling, get local voices on the air, and return WYSO to a truly community radio station. So that's how it started. And in the last 15 years, it's grown and grown, and we're so happy to say that we're going really strong today.
That's great. And I understand that Nina just was given an award a couple of weeks ago. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, this is a Leo C. Lee Award that she won, and received that in Kansas City, and gave a really lovely speech that's available online in case anybody wants to hear it. And she talks in that speech about the history of the Center for Community Voices. And this is she's done a lot in her career, but this is one of her points of pride. And so it's a really good thing. We got off to a great start thanks to Nina.
Yeah.
And Nina, I should say, is still very involved today. We work together a lot, and I speak to her several times a week.
Well, I listened to the speech as she was accepting the award and told the story of this. And I'll include the link to that speech wherever this is posted, because it's fantastic.
Great.
One of the stories she tells in that speech is about Mary Evans and how she sort of embodies this program. Can you tell us a little bit about Mary?
Yeah, Mary was our friend, and she came to WYSO a couple years ago and did a lot here. But what she's most known for at WYSO is a series called Reentry Stories about returned citizens, people that are formerly incarcerated, returning to their civilian life. And Mary was a returned citizen herself, and so she had access to that community, and that community trusted her. And I was Mary's editor for the last season of Reentry Stories, which was the 5th season. All of this is online, by the way, at WYSO, and Reentry Stories is a podcast too, WYSO.org. And then Mary passed away a couple weeks ago, so we lost Mary, and we're still grieving her, but still just so fortunate that she was a part of our lives, because we've learned a lot from her.
My condolences, and I'm very sorry to hear that. But it was wonderful that you could have such an impact on her life. So,
well, she had an impact on our lives.
Yeah, that's great. I want to, for the sake of this conversation, draw a distinction, and I don't mean to get buried in the semantics, because we could go down that rabbit hole. But often when talking to content creators, it's helpful to draw a distinction between an audience and a community. And I think it's worth it to, draw that distinction here, because you have both in play. When we are creating an audience, we create content and by and large broadcast that content out in one direction. Maybe the audience can talk back to us a little bit. Whereas when we create a community, we are creating a space for people to come together because they have shared values or a shared mission. They're trying to do something. And what's so interesting about what you're doing here is you've got both. So you have a larger audience and you wanted to create content that better reflected that audience. And so what you did is you created a space to bring together and created a community of local producers. I think that was how Nina described it, who have that shared mission of creating content that reflects the audience. And so in this conversation, the case study that we're looking at is actually that smaller community of producers that are producing that content. Talk to me about how you view the shared mission of those producers. What are they trying to do?
Well, that's an interesting question and distinction you bring up. I mean, the word community is a big word around here, and certainly to me, because it's part of my job description. When I think of community, gosh, I do think of our audience, but I think more to your point, I think of the community of producers, community of storytellers that I work with in this region to create content. So that's my first thought when I think about community. In the Center for Community Voices, they're producers that we work with and train. So that's my first thought when I think of the word community. And so they are different than our audience. I mean, we have our bigger audience, but then within that, we have this group of community voices, community storytellers. I say local stories by local storytellers. And those are the people that I work with the most, both in terms of training and editing and telling stories.
Yeah. So they are there to tell stories and to tell their stories. One of the things that we often draw a distinction between is the shared mission of the community members, the mission that they all have, which, as you said, is to tell their stories. But then there's the business purpose. I don't know if business purpose is the right word when you're talking about a nonprofit organization, but the organizational reason for hosting a community, which may overlap, but is often a little bit different. Why does WYSO build this community and host this community of local producers?
Well, I think there's a few reasons, but in terms of maybe business reasons, I think the Community Voices program and the Center for Community Voices is such a known and beloved part of the WYSO brand. So there is brand building around what we're doing. Also when we're a public radio station, so also when we are fundraising and we have membership drives, certainly the local content that we have created, the local stories, when our members or our audience, because we know not all audience are members, but so when our audience, hear these local stories and hear their neighbors, and that makes a more compelling pitch, I think, in terms of raising funds. Then there's an educational and workforce development part of what we do too, just in terms of the area, because we are working in radio and podcasting, but these skills, as you know, are transferable. One of our programs is WYSO Youth Radio, and we work with high schools in the area. And, we know from that and from working with teachers that the students become better writers when they do this kind of work. And, just structuring a story and being concise and all of that those are skills that move across mediums. So there are reasons outside of just creating local content for the audience that I think you could consider to be sort of business reasons. And then too, not all of our instruction is monetized, but some of it is. We've been doing this for a long time, so we've tried all kinds of different models. When we are able to secure grants, which we've been able to do lately, then we can offer that training to people for free. But times when we're not able to secure a grant, we do monetize that training. So there are some business ways to look at the work that we're doing. I mean, I'm fortunate because, at least yet, as you and I have talked about offline, it's a tough time in public media and public radio, so who knows what the future holds. But so far, I've been really super fortunate that I haven't had to approach my work first and foremost with a business lens. I've been able to think about it more in terms of the creative vision and democratizing storytelling and hearing from people in our community.
Yeah.
You could apply a business lens to it. Maybe I will. Sometimes I do, but I haven't had to focus on that yet, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. But I think the idea here is that there's an organizational reason for doing this that goes beyond just the shared mission that maybe the members have. That
Oh, yeah.
yeah, that there's a reason for doing so. I said at the outset that when our goal is to build a community, what we're doing is creating a space for people to come together and connect for a common purpose. Let's talk about what your space looks like. Are your members, are they actually coming to the station, or what do you do with them?
Well, the space that we have created looks different in different circumstances, but oftentimes it's instruction, it's editing, it's revision, it's things like that, and we do that in person. We prioritize in-person meetings and sessions just because the power of connecting is different in person and better. I'll say it's better. That's my opinion. So we prioritize that. But we also do a lot of work online, of course, in terms of instruction and revision and editing. We work online. We have in-person listening events where we come together and just listen to things together. One of the last listening events we had, one of the big ones, was with Mary Evans that we mentioned earlier, and listening to some of the excerpts from the latest season of Reentry Stories. And it was a wonderful, powerful event. And it's fun to think about it because I loved working with Mary because she really enjoyed, sometimes, we say storytelling, but I'll say story building, because a lot of the times it feels like we're really building something and putting this here and this and this, and it feels like you're building rather than telling. And I love doing that. That's when I'm in my happy place, is when I'm story building. And Mary loved to do that too. She and I just had a lot of fun, but we would kind of just blow things up. And what about this? And we'd have a great ending, and we'd say, what if we put the ending at the beginning? What would that, And she, as much as I, just love to kind of get in there and just kind of create and build stories. Anyway, I'm thinking about Mary, so I got off topic. But yeah, so the space that we create looks different all the time. And, we've been doing this for a long time. So we've tried a lot of different things just in terms of instructional design even. We've taught the Community Voices program across 6 months. We've taught it over the course of a weekend. We've gone to schools and businesses and done one-day workshops. We've done every kind of instructional design, and we've been able to kind of work the bugs out and just really sort of refine it. But in that discovery and experimenting, we've done all kinds of different things. So whenever we have an opportunity to work with a new storyteller, a new group of storytellers, one of the first things I do is just kind of an assessment about, do you want to do this in person? Does it work to do this online? How much time do you have? Whatever it is, we can accommodate it because we've been doing this a while and we've kind of figured out ways that it works.
You touch on something that's really important there, which is that there's a lot of experimentation that goes into creating the space. It's not just a matter of if you build it, they will come. That it sounds like it's changed and it's evolved, and I assume it's changed and evolved in part in response to feedback from the actual community members, the producers themselves. Is that what happened?
Oh, absolutely. And things are always changing. I mean, this is the fun of this industry, is that it's kind of different, from year to year. So I wouldn't become too precious or too invested in any one particular kind of space because it probably will be changing soon enough. We found that, but we always lean into that and embrace it. And for me, that's kind of the fun of it, just because, I like new things and I have kind of like the novel gene. I was in education for a long time, so I'm pretty comfortable with instructional design, and I'm comfortable just kind of, changing things up based upon who the community is, who the audience is, who the storytellers are, and what what they have available to them and what they don't. And that can sometimes that's tools, sometimes that's location, sometimes that's time. But it really is kind of a case by case thing. But yeah, so feedback is a constant. Again, one of the benefits to being able to do something like this over years is just collecting all of that feedback that you get about what's working, what's not working. And, we knew that we were going to be doing this again and again and again. And so there was no particular well, now we're collecting feedback. That was just a part and still is a part of the process. So we're always, we approach all of this with a yes mind, ask a lot of questions, what's working, what's not working, and we're always changing based upon what our community is telling us. And that changes from year to year because, like I said, this industry changes from year to year. And the tools are so different. I mean, I can remember, I've been doing this a while, and so I remember we still work with professional recorders, but I remember working with them at the very beginning of this kind of project, and there was a lot of time that we would spend on these little digital recorders, like these Zoom devices or Marantz or whatever it was that we were using, spending a lot of time in class going over that. And I noticed that, at some point people just started getting really, really fast with it. And, people were just really good with these things. And I thought, well, how is everyone getting so comfortable? And, I realized oh yeah, the more people work with their phones, you give them a little recorder like a Marantz and they just kind of can go in and it's yeah, phantom power. I don't know, but I'll figure it out, So anyway, yeah, again, don't kind of lock yourself into anything because things change. The industry changes, technology changes, people change. So these spaces change.
Yeah. You mentioned educational design. I'm assuming that this is not just lectures that you're giving when people come in for the training. What does engagement between your community members look like?
It's not just lectures. And in lecture, I was a professor, college professor for many years. So lecture is a word that who wants a lecture? But there is, we do a lot of hands-on work, I mean, one of the things, so yeah, there is lectures. We do a lot of listening. We do a lot of editing. We do a lot of peer-to-peer listening and editing. One of the things, just for example, one assignment that I do all the time is that I work a lot with StoryCorps. I worked with StoryCorps on lots of projects, and I'm working on a big project with them now. So, I have raw access to raw interviews, people having conversations, and I'd give my students these 50-minute conversations and say, cut it down to 5 minutes, okay? And then listen to what they did. I always do the assignment, and it's amazing to me that in that one assignment, how quickly and how much students learn about storytelling. That assignment gets them into the DAW, whatever we're using, Audition, Hindenburg, whatever it is we're using. So it gets them into the weeds in terms of editing. But also, when you give 10 people that same tape and have them cut it and you listen to them, there's 10 different versions of that story. And, you'll see the students say, I was thinking about ending it that way, but I just couldn't figure out I love the way you started. I thought, it so much is learned about storytelling in one assignment like that. So, no, not lectures so much as really, really getting into the weeds in terms of building, telling stories, editing, sharing, peer-to-peer listening. That's what we do in our classes.
Yeah, that's fascinating. The value that you can get out of hearing how somebody else did the exact same task and wound up coming up with something completely different.
Yeah, it's fun. I worked with a lot of students and you can tell when they're engaged and when they're not engaged. And when you're in a classroom for a long time, you really kind of hone that skill. And with that assignment, when they're listening to how someone else told the same story that they told, it's really interesting because there's 100% engagement. They're just really, really listening to what their peer did and how they did it. And that it's almost electric, and this is like a teacher talking, which is boring, but that you can almost see the learning and it's electric.
Yeah. let's talk about onboarding. And onboarding is sort of the digital term for, when you're dealing with digital communities. I think it's different when you're talking about communities that are a little more in person like yours, where we might talk about orientation or frankly just welcoming or the initiation. But the idea here is that when somebody first joins a community, their first moments in, they've been accepted, they've crossed the threshold, and you're trying to orient them and welcome them and show them how to participate. What does that look like for your program?
Well, I'm always interested in who the audience is and who your neighbors are. So regardless of what we're doing, whenever we get a group of people together that haven't met, we introduce ourselves to each other and talk about why we're here and why we are a part of the space. Because people come to this kind of work, to storytelling for different reasons, and they have, it's important, helpful certainly to know what their expectations are and what they're confident about, what they're maybe insecure about. Those are the things that we talk about at the very beginning. And so when you say the word onboarding, that's kind of what comes to my mind is the first time we meet. I want people to get to know each other and be comfortable with each other because as you know, it's like when you're doing this kind of work, or regardless, even if you're a writer and you're in a creative writing group and you're going to be sharing your work with people and with peers, that's takes a lot of bravery to do that. You have to put yourself in a place of vulnerability and also we do a lot of revision too, and that's one of the things I tried to do when I was teaching in college. Because I don't know that, oftentimes, and this is not always the case, but oftentimes, in students, in classes, you do an assignment, you turn it in, you get a grade, and then that's it, and class is over or the semester's over. And that's not how it is in the industry. And so I wanted my students to be comfortable with revision and doing something and making it better and better and better and not think it was punitive, because if you haven't had a lot of experience with it, it feels punitive, like you did something wrong, and that isn't the case. And so anyway, I think it takes a real vulnerability and a real bravery to put yourself in that situation, to share something creative and artistic that you did and ask for feedback, and not just compliments, but genuinely, how do I make this better? That's hard. And so I think in order to be able to do that successfully, people have to know who their neighbors are and who their peers are and feel comfortable with each other. So that's something we try to do at the front end in the onboarding process.
Yeah, what we're talking about here is essentially establishing psychological safety, making sure that everybody feels safe because, like you said, they're going to be in vulnerable positions. They're going to get feedback, and they need to make sure that they're not feeling attacked when they get that feedback, that they understand that it's a place where they can be vulnerable and it's safe to do so.
And once you get comfortable with that process, and you never really get over it. It's always hard to share something you did with someone and say, really, honestly, tell me what you think of this. That's always hard to do. But once you recognize that is, can be, should be, and is a positive process that will lead to the work getting better, that's wonderful. Like, that's a great feeling to have something that you created that you're really proud of. Share it with people that you trust and know that it's going to get even better because of them. Like, that's lovely.
Yeah. We're talking about how your community members can get feedback on their work, but I want to talk a little bit about how you get feedback. And we touched on this earlier. You said that, we're all experimenting. We figured out what works over the years. Do you have a formal process for getting feedback from the people who go through the program? Are you surveying them or what are you doing? What does that look like?
Yeah, we do. And, part of this probably is because, again, I come from a higher education environment, and there's always, evaluations at the end. But we do a similar thing in Community Voices every time we end a class, or we, whatever that particular training looks like, we have an assessment and ask what we could do better, is this what they had hoped, if all of that. There's a number of questions around how did we do? And how can we get better?
Yeah. And let's talk about metrics. How do you measure your success? What does that look like? How do you know whether this program is working?
Well, there's a few things. I mean, there are metrics available just in terms of like, well, how many downloads has this gotten? How many hits on the website? What is the listener engagement? All of those things can be measured. Since we are a radio station, we have a web presence, we have a podcast presence. All of those things can be measured. So there's that is one way to get metrics. And then there's anecdotal things too. Like just is your work being seen and heard? We did a series not long ago. I'm not far from Springfield, Ohio, just a couple of miles from Springfield, Ohio. And so in the debate last year, when that community was targeted and lied about in the presidential debate, we wanted to work with some of the Haitian Americans there on a storytelling project. And so we put together a group and worked with them over the course of several weeks, training them how to make audio stories. And they created a series called Haitians in the Heartland. And it's super popular. It's a beloved series that we have. And so, yeah, I mean, it was featured all over the state, and it was even featured on PBS NewsHour. In addition to metrics, you can kind of tell if your work is getting out there, if people are paying attention to it, if they're sharing it, if it's being seen and heard. And so we do that, and I have a lot of it's kind of rare that I go. It sounds like I'm bragging, but it's rare that I go through a day that I don't get some compliment on something that came out of the Center for Community Voices. Just today, I got several about a WYSO Youth radio story. We have a series called We Outside, which had a wonderful episode yesterday about bird watching. It's about a series of people of color being in parks and outdoor spaces. And so anyway, those are the metrics that I like when people stop me and tell me, "Oh, I heard this story, I loved it." But if I know that's not always compelling to business people. So when business people are in the room, we can get out the metrics and look at
but
the
it's not
downloads
always quantitative. It can be qualitative, right? I mean, it can be things like what you're talking about, where you just get that feedback from the audience, and it tells you that you're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and again, I'm lucky, like I'm super lucky because of my job. I've been able to work in that space. We're talking about spaces, creative spaces. I've been fortunate because that's where I'm able to work and not worry about, oh, I need this many more downloads for WYSO Youth Radio this week or else. I haven't had to deal with that, I mean, who knows what the future holds for public radio, but I work with such a lovely and generous and high-minded group of people. I don't see that happening anytime soon. But, nothing happens by accident, right? I mean, that's why I'm here. That's why I took this job, because I knew this group. I knew this community. They're super talented, and they're great people to work with. So this is where I want to be.
So what's been the biggest challenge in all of this?
That people think this work is easy. And again, I'm a teacher, so this is how I'm receiving your question. But one of the things that I hear from people over and over again, and this includes when I was teaching at the university, people hear podcasts, they hear audio stories, they hear the radio, and they just think like, anybody can do it. You just need not even a microphone, right? You just need a smartphone, and you can do it. So I hear from people over and over again. When you go through the process and you learn how to write for the ear and you're voicing and you're, cutting, it's an art form, and so they'll say oftentimes, I didn't know this would take as long as it does, and I didn't know this would be as hard as it is. And it is, like to do any work that is broadcast quality, that's publishable, whatever the medium is, it requires a lot of work. But so that's the challenge, I think, is trying to, and goes back to our onboarding question about at the beginning of these instructional sessions and things like that, the classes. I am interested in what who's there and why they're there and what they're confident about, what they're insecure about, what they want to get out of it. Because I, as an instructor, am also sort of, gauging, okay, this I need to work more with this student, or maybe we need to communicate more about like the actual work involved in this. Because to do this work, and I'm a production person, so I like to spend a lot of time with these things and really create a nice crafted story. It's going to take some time and it's going to take some work. So communicating that, I think, is the biggest challenge. Just people knowing what they're getting into.
I will vouch for how difficult it is to do what you do. I've been a radio broadcaster for 30 years, but I've been a commercial broadcaster, which is very different than what you do. With putting together and like you said, building the story from all those pieces and editing.
Yeah.
My skill set is I can hit a post, which means I can talk right up to the moment that the lyrics in a song start, and then I can shut up. Which is not a very useful skill to have.
I know you do a lot more than that. That's not true. You're modest.
That's it. Let me ask, is there, we talked a little bit about how there's experimentation, and I think this is one of the things that, frankly, is so different about being a community builder versus being a content creator. And you're in a position where you are both. With the content, you have control over it until the moment you hit publish and it goes out over the airwaves, on the internet, wherever it might go. With the community, it is something that you are essentially co-creating with the members. It's an iterative process, and like we said, you experiment and it changes. Is there anything, knowing what you know now, that you would do differently about building this community of producers that you've been building?
Oh gosh, I think it's going to sound like I'm begging the question, and I don't mean to, but I don't really have an answer for that because we've been doing it for so long, and because I've been doing it a while. So with the assessment and with the feedback and with implementing the feedback, I can't recall a moment or a thing that I would do differently because it's always evolving, it's always getting better. Now the classes that we teach now compared to maybe the classes from 15 years ago, I think in some ways, are very similar, but in other ways, because of technology or because of some of the things we have available to us in terms of remote interviews, remote, instruction, what you and I are doing now, they look different too. So yeah, since it's evolving and since it's changed over the course of 15 years, I can't recall anything I would do differently. I think we did something differently after every single class we taught, and really after every single story that we create and air. There's something that happens when you can. I'm sure you experience this too. You'll have an experience or a memory of what you and I are doing right now, but then when you consume this media later, and you're out of the moment, you will see and hear and experience it differently. And I have that experience with every single story I hear on the radio that I'm involved in some way. So it's always changing and learning and getting better and this and that. So I feel like that didn't really answer your question, but I really can't think of anything I would do differently.
Well, I think the important thing here is that on the one hand, there's nothing that maybe you do differently. On the other hand, it sounds like you do everything differently every time. So.
Every single time, yeah. I don't ever do the same thing twice.
Right. So, and I think that's so important for this is this idea, and I do find this as somebody who has worked in content creation for most of my life. That is one of the things that I have found personally that I've had to adapt to when it comes to community building. Is this idea that it's kind of this living, breathing thing that is always evolving and always changing.
And that's the fun of it.
Right. And it's not a set it and forget it kind of thing, and you leave it behind. Let me ask you one last question. You've been doing this for a while now. What's your biggest win or just one that you're really proud of in the course of doing this?
Oh boy. I mean, I just learn so much, and I think if I'm learning, then the audience will circle back to the audience conversation. If I'm learning, the audience is learning. And I have learned so much about young people through WYSO Youth Radio. I've learned so much about returned citizens and people formerly incarcerated through Mary's series, Reentry Stories. I have been producing a series called Veterans Voices for 10 years now. I've learned so much about veterans and their experiences. Haitians in the heartland, I mentioned that. I learned so much about our Haitian American friends in Springfield and what they're going through, what they went through last year. So, the win to me is just I get to oftentimes, be with, like physically in person, be with people that I don't know and they have a different lived experience. And I'm curious. I'm just curious about that. And so I get to talk to them and learn from them. And, when we make it possible for them to tell their own story in their own voice, I just learn so much. And I'm curious. I mean, who is not curious about their neighbors? I think maybe some people aren't, but that's weird to me. But, I feel like I have the best job in the world. I get to just meet people that I would never meet otherwise and get to talk to them and work with them and learn about their lives. And I'm curious. I'm nosy. I'm curious. And so that's a great gig. So my biggest win is just learning so much about so many different people that are literally my neighbors.
Well, that's fantastic. Will Davis, thank you so much for joining us. Again, it's the Center for Community Voices at WYSO in Ohio. And people can go and they can actually hear some of the results of, the things that your community is putting out just by going to WYSO.org and clicking on the Community Voices, and you've got all sorts of stuff there.
I hope they do. I want you to. I hope they do. And then send me an email. You can contact me through the website. Any questions or anything, send me an email. I love to engage with people.
Well, Will, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, Seth.